Recently, we actually had kind of a random big spike in views on my video on the 2018 MacBooks, and recently I've been thinking a lot about the 12-inch MacBook in particular. I think it has a lot more potential than people give it credit for, so today's video, I'd like to expand on that idea. The MacBook Air turned 10 years old recently, and while I know the MacBook Air is not technically the same product line as the 12-inch MacBook, I really think it should be. I thought the 12-inch should have just been called the MacBook Air because it is, after all, the lightest MacBook. And I thought the MacBook Air got a lot of criticisms that the same 12-inch MacBook is getting to this day. Originally, when the MacBook Air came out, it did not have a CD drive, and it still doesn't have one. And at the time of its release, that was a big controversial thing. People were like, how could you? How is that possible? And now we're seeing a MacBook be released without a USB port. And once again, everyone was like, how could you? But as time's going on, we're starting to see that become a bit more normal. Okay, I know a lot of people out there still require that, but back in MacBook Air days, having a laptop without a CD drive was kind of mind-blowing. Like, that's never been done before. If you have a laptop, of course, you can put DVDs and CDs into it, but no, Apple sold the $100 super drive separately from that, and that's, of course, where a lot of the external hard drives or external dongle jokes came from Apple that we are still dealing with to this day. But as we can see now, a lot of people really love their MacBook Air. They love that it's the cheapest MacBook. A lot of college students go with the MacBook Air. It's one of the most popular MacBooks out there, and yet at its release, it was very heavily criticized, and I think the 12-inch MacBook is going to go a similar way. Now, in 2018, it's expected that we'll probably get some kind of MacBook refresh around the June era. Probably not a major one. I know I've talked about my MacBook Pro concept in the past, where instead of having a touch bar, we literally combined the keyboard, the trackpad, and the touch bar all into one giant touch surface so that we have our display and a giant ever-changing OLED touchscreen that adapts to what apps you're using. That will be cool, and I want that to happen, but I don't predict it will happen in 2018. I think we got to take little steps before we get there, because mostly the general public is not ready for that change. And also a lot of technologies like embedding haptic feedback in a device that size, or supporting a battery life that can support a full visual display and touch input display at the same time. It's probably going to be tricky before that's ready. So I would love to see a lot of the MacBook Pro features make their way into the 12-inch MacBook. So for one, of course, everyone goes straight with the touch bar, as you saw in the thumbnail. I noticed when I started using my iMac Pro that I really like having a touch bar, both for sharing files with AirDrop, the fact that I can click on a file and there's just a share button ready to go. I prefer changing my volume with the slider as well as with the display brightness. I actually really love the predictive text features while I'm iMessaging people. And overall, I found myself on the new iMac Pro oftentimes reaching up for where the function keys are, looking for more options. So while the touch bar is kind of gimmicky and not really used a ton of the time, I found myself missing it. And more recently, since my iMac Pro has been my powerhouse, I've been thinking about how my 15-inch MacBook is pretty heavy and it's pretty large for what I use it for these days. And who knows, perhaps if there's a good enough refresh in June, I might sell my old MacBook Pro in exchange for a heavily maxed out 12-inch MacBook, because my laptop is not my powerhouse anymore. I don't use it for high-intensive stuff. It might make more sense for me anyways to invest in a laptop that has a primary focus on portability, and speed is more of a secondary thing, because that's what the 12-inch MacBook is really built for. Not so much about speed, but when it comes to portability, it's amazing how insanely light it is. I just can recall back when I reviewed the 12-inch MacBook, how easy it was to use, to just hold and type with one hand, and to throw it in a backpack. It basically added no weight. I love that design form factor. So adding that touch bar to the 12-inch MacBook, seeing that keyboard go edge to edge, I think would really bring Tim Cook's vision of how MacBooks should be to life. And of course, adding in Touch ID. Only really because Touch ID is built into MacBooks already. But again, now with the invention of the iPhone 10 and Face ID, perhaps embedding those Face ID sensors into the top bezel of the MacBook should be more of a focus. So for the sake of this being a concept idea, my 2018 12-inch MacBook would have Face ID to unlock as well. But because you really don't have to get rid of Touch ID for those people who want it, go ahead and add that. I mean, Apple included the headphone jack on the MacBook after the iPhone 7 came out, which I found hypocritical. But for people out there who prefer Touch ID, perhaps they can go with that route for the people who don't want sensors looking at them all the time. While this may drive the price a little bit higher, I think having different options for security would probably satisfy people more. One big change, though, that I would like to make, because we removed the headphone jack so long ago, is that because this is a laptop that has a focus on portability, okay? So it is not built for super advanced video professionals or audio professionals. I think it would be okay that at least on the 12-inch MacBook, MacBook, you can ditch the headphone jack and just add a second USB-C port. I could think of so many more applications in which having two USB-C ports would be more helpful on the 12-inch MacBook. For one, being able to charge it from either side, as well as being able to use one USB-C accessory and also adding another. Just two, I think, would be fine for most casual MacBook users out there. Of course, I know there's audio professionals who do audio editing, and if Apple felt that bad about removing the headphone jack on a Mac, I think they could at least just include a couple dongles, like a USB-C to headphone jack one. But believe me, I've heard all the complaints saying you audio engineers don't like latency between the wireless headphones and computers. I hear you, okay? I'm not saying ditch it on all the MacBooks, just on this one, because it's built for general Mac users. And for people like that, they're most likely going to be pairing their AirPods to it anyway, because if you're buying a MacBook, you're most likely in the Apple ecosystem. So ditching the headphone jack, of course, is going to upset a bunch of people, but I don't think it would hurt the sales overall, because a lot of people would still buy it anyway. Because I like colors and options, I would love to see it come in all different types of colors, as it has before. Space gray, silver, gold, and rose gold. I would love to see all of that diversity in a MacBook lineup, and I'm hoping that this year, as we can move into even faster mobile cores designed by Intel, or perhaps we're ready for Apple to start developing their own processor chips into the MacBooks, just like they've designed chips for their iPads and iPhones. Now, of course, they would have to adapt Mac OS and the hardware itself so it could support an ARM architecture. I get all the technical issues with trying to put an iPad processor in a Mac. It's not that easy. I'm saying there probably is a way Apple could figure it out. There's rumors that they're working on this anyway, so I don't think it's too far-fetched to say perhaps we could see an A11X chip or an A12 chip put into the 12-inch MacBook. Just for the sake of having a processor enhancement, maybe if it's designed by Apple, battery life could be better, efficiency could be better. That's what I would like to see in one. Retaining that portability, but getting better at processing stuff. And if you're looking at the Geekbench scores for the A11 chip right now, it's actually doing insanely better than a lot of the current maxed out 12-inch MacBooks. So if they were able to embed Apple's own design processor chips into the next generation of MacBooks, you could see a huge performance boost, which is kind of necessary with the 12-inch MacBooks because they don't have cooling systems. There is no fans. They run silently, but that also means if the computer gets hot, it literally just has to start slowing down. And one last idea here, this is kind of a last-minute idea, and it actually wasn't even mine. To credit where credit is due, this was Nick Answini's idea, who brought this up on the Tailosive Tech podcast. He would love to see a different size option come to the 12-inch MacBook lineup. Similar to the MacBook Air, when it first came out, there was only one size, but over time, because it became so popular, they gave two different size options. So maybe some people out there don't want all the power in the world, they don't want a dedicated GPU, they don't want a super fast processor, they just want something to be light and portable, but maybe the 12-inch MacBook is a tad too small. So what if we had a 12-inch MacBook and a 15-inch regular MacBook, okay? Not a Pro, so still just two USB-C ports, but a much larger display, much more vibrant one. Of course, it would cost a little bit more money, but maybe you could get some more battery life out of it. We all know that the parts inside a 12-inch MacBook are not that big. In fact, they're about the size of a smartphone. So those parts staying the same, maybe you'd have some more room for battery. Maybe you'd have some more room for a larger trackpad or some louder speakers, perhaps, because my 15-inch MacBook Pro has great speakers. It'd be great if they could move that into a much lighter device for people who care more about portability. And as someone now who has a stationary iMac Pro desktop for all my power-intensive editing, I'm starting to understand why I might want to go with a laptop that has a primary focus on portability. So that's the end of my concept video. This is kind of the things I would like to see the 2018 MacBooks do. Of course, they're probably not going to. Usually if I want something or if I predict something, it doesn't end up happening. But I'm allowed to wish, right? This is a dream video. Let me know what you would like to see in a MacBook. Would you bring back old ports? Would you bring back the SD card slot? I'm sure there's lots of opinions out there. Let me know in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.